Did Buckingham Palace or Prince William set a trap for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and were they gullible enough to fall into it?
He's had enough. He wants to clean the monarchy, and it's all now in the hands of the courts. Meghan Markle is in full mode panic along with Harry because they both know what they did.
The stories would come out. So apparently, according to other journalists, we found out that there were a lot of porcupines probably told to the royals and even to Harry when they met her, and in order to cover up.
It's actually torture to listen to that woman now, because every other word out of her mouth.
What if I told you a £157 million courtroom explosion in the United Kingdom just sent shockwaves all the way to Montecito? And what if the name nobody expected to be sweating tonight is Meghan Markle? Because while Buckingham Palace stays polished and silent, and Frogmore Cottage pretends everything is perfectly fine, a centuries-old law just woke up. 4 words. Born of the body. Harmless? Not when it's tied to bloodlines. Not when it's tied to power. And definitely not when it's tied to the Succession to the Crown Act. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. A separate aristocratic inheritance battle involving the Marquis of Bath has thrown the Act of Settlement 1701 back into public debate.
Maybe King Charles didn't want to do anything about it given what's going on with Andrew, but in order for William to save the monarchy, he has to deal with the Archie and Lilibet problem.
And suddenly, people asking questions nobody dared to ask out loud before. Why were traditional birth protocols quietly altered? Why were palace confirmations handled differently this time? And why does every simple question spark a storm of legal statements instead of a simple answer? Coincidence? Or constitutional chaos? Because insiders whisper that Prince William saw this coming years ago. And if he did, then this isn't just gossip. It's a ticking clock. Stay with me, because this rabbit hole isn't shallow. It's royal deep.
Something is happening right now in the courts, which is incredibly important, and nobody's paying attention to it because this will make history, and not in a good way for Rachel Meghan Markle.
The thing about ancient kingdoms is this: they don't collapse because of wars anymore. They collapse because of questions. And right now, the United Kingdom isn't fighting invaders. It's fighting whispers. Meghan Markle was never supposed to be the quiet duchess. From the moment she stepped into Buckingham Palace, cameras followed, headlines multiplied, and traditionalists clutched their pearls like it was an Olympic sport. She was modern. She was media-savvy. She was brand-aware. And according to her critics, she was dangerously strategic. Prince Harry, the once-beloved spare to the throne, had already been viewed as restless. A prince who didn't like hierarchy. A royal who resented structure. Add Meghan's Hollywood-polished confidence to that mix, and you didn't just get a couple, you got a disruption. And disruptions make institutions nervous. Especially institutions built on parchment, protocol, and bloodline. Now rewind to the births. When Archie Mountbatten Windsor was announced to the public, something subtle shifted. No grand staircase photo call. No official palace physicians lining up like constitutional referees. No ceremonial signatures framed for history books. Instead, a carefully worded announcement. A tightly controlled reveal. A new approach. Supporters called it modernization. Critics called it selective transparency. But it was brushed aside. Because people were distracted.
Put an article out there that Meghan had a hysterectomy and couldn't have children. And that was a big issue in their relationship. So that says a lot to the fake royal kids right now. Because obviously they couldn't have come out of her. So that's something that she obviously is going to have to do.
There were bigger dramas unfolding. Interviews. Departures. That emotional primetime sit-down that shattered palace etiquette like a dropped teacup. Then came Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor. Born across the ocean, at a private medical facility, with only family present. Prince Harry later described the moment with poetic detail. Candlelight, whispered affirmations, hands guiding life into the world. Beautiful, absolutely. Constitutionally routine? That's where the silence gets louder. Because here's the problem traditionalists can't ignore. For centuries, royal births were not private family events. They were constitutional confirmations. Witnessed. Documented. Verified. Not because anyone doubted the mothers, but because monarchies don't run on vibes. They run on verification. Now enter the Marquis of Bath. A respected aristocrat. Old money. Old titles. Older estate. When his £157 million inheritance structure was challenged over the eligibility of his son, Henry, under the Peerage Act 1963, It didn't look like royal drama at first. It looked like a boring trust dispute. Until the presiding judge referenced the Act of Settlement 1701. That's when historians started blinking. Because that decree doesn't just govern estates. It echoes through the Succession to the Crown Act. And suddenly, legal analysts began asking a theoretical question that hit like a thunderclap. If inheritance trust requires strict biological definitions under ancient wording, would succession law interpret similar language the same way? Notice the phrasing.
She had a lot of health issues and she couldn't have one of her children. So they had to use a surrogate in the United States. Why the United States? Because in the United Kingdom, the children, even though through a surrogate, belong to the surrogate.
Theoretical. Interpret. Similar. Nobody accused Meghan of anything. Nobody filed charges. Nobody opened official probes. But once that question was spoken aloud on a primetime legal panel, it didn't disappear. It multiplied. Talk radio in the United Kingdom exploded. Comment sections turned into digital battlegrounds. Why were traditional protocols skipped? Why were palace medical witnesses absent? Why did procedure change? And perhaps the most uncomfortable one, who approved the deviation? Inside Buckingham Palace, sources say Prince William has been methodical, quiet, focused. He doesn't leak. He doesn't rage. He recalculates. And insiders describe him as someone who believes that monarchy survives not by adapting recklessly, but by reinforcing foundations. If a rule exists, he wants it followed. If a precedent exists, he wants it respected. And if ambiguity exists, he wants it eliminated. Which is why palace observers noted something subtle but significant last month. The official royal website updated procedural language regarding succession documentation. Minor wording changes. Technical adjustments. But in royal politics, wording is warfare. Meghan, meanwhile, has kept her public appearances polished. Charity galas, lifestyle launches, carefully curated interviews emphasizing authenticity, empowerment, independence. Yet critics argue that empowerment rings differently when constitutional questions linger unanswered. Is that fair? Maybe not. Is it viral? Absolutely. Because the internet doesn't operate on fairness. It operates on curiosity. And curiosity has latched onto one central theme. If nothing is unusual, why does everything feel different? Why did centuries of rituals suddenly become optional?
Marquess of Bath was open and transparent about this. So she is right now going through the legal process because as per the Peerage Act of 1963, that child born in the United States from a surrogate is not entitled to anything, inheritance or anything.
Why did verification become personalization? Why did public ceremony become private narrative? Supporters argue modernization is overdue. Opponents argue modernization doesn't override monarchy mechanics. And Prince William? He hasn't said a word publicly. But silence, in royal politics, is rarely empty. It's strategic. Especially when the British Parliament has reportedly scheduled closed-door discussions on succession clarity reforms. That phrase alone was enough to set tabloids ablaze. Succession clarity. Reforms. Two words that should never have to coexist in a stable monarchy. And yet here we are. A £157 million inheritance dispute morphs into a philosophical debate about bloodline law. An aristocrat's courtroom uncertainty ignites national speculation. And Meghan Markle, once celebrated as the monarchy's modern face, now finds herself at the center of a conversation she never officially joined. Not accused, not charged, but undeniably discussed. And in royal history, being discussed is sometimes more dangerous than being prosecuted. Because accusations can be fought. Rumors can be denied. But doubt lingers. And in the United Kingdom, doubt doesn't fade. It waits. Quietly. Like a ticking clock behind velvet curtains. And if this is only the beginning of the conversation, then what happens when British Parliament starts asking questions out loud? Stay with me. Because the whispers are getting louder. And the courtroom that started this storm? Isn't finished yet.b. By the time the second hearing in the Marquess of Bath's case wrapped for the day, something unusual had already happened. It wasn't the ruling. It wasn't the testimony. It was the leak. Not an official document. Not a confirmed transcript. But a summary. Circulating through elite legal circles in the United Kingdom before sunrise. 3 paragraphs. 1 highlighted sentence. And a phrase that detonated across social media within hours. Statutory interpretation of hereditary eligibility may require clarification under parallel constitutional frameworks. Translation? If the wording is vague in aristocratic inheritance, it might be vague elsewhere too. Cue chaos. By noon, trending tags were everywhere. #bloodline debate, #royal clarity, #decreegate Montecito, according to insiders, shifted into controlled containment mode. Advisors flying in. Communications teams tightening messaging. Social media posts suddenly pivoting from lifestyle gloss to family warmth. Pictures of orchards. Sunsets. Soft focus normalcy. When optics change overnight, people notice. Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, Prince William was reportedly in back-to-back briefings with constitutional scholars. Not emergency meetings. Not crisis summits. Clarification consultations. That's what palace officials called them. But in the United Kingdom, when the future king consults succession lawyers, nobody calls it casual. Because here's what most people don't understand about monarchies: they are emotional symbols wrapped in legal machinery. And when the machinery creaks, even slightly, the symbolism trembles. Now let's talk about the whispers that made everything combustible. An anonymous legal analyst, calling themselves UK Watch, posted a thread that went nuclear. They claimed that during the drafting of procedural updates in recent years, certain verification steps were streamlined. Streamlined. Such an innocent word. Until you realize it means something was removed. The thread didn't accuse.
Meghan Markle has been incredibly quiet about the birth, but mostly the pregnancy of these children. Everything has been shady. The one who's been blabbing and saying crazy things is Prince.
It didn't confirm wrongdoing. It simply asked, why were legacy protocols altered without public clarification? Within minutes, defenders of Meghan Markle jumped in. Modern times require modern practices. Privacy is not a crime. Not everything needs to be ceremonial theater. Valid arguments. But the critics weren't debating privacy. They were debating precedent. Because precedent is monarchy oxygen. Without it, everything feels experimental. And monarchies do not experiment well. Then came the spending angle. Oh yes. Because what's a scandal without numbers that make people gasp? Documents surfaced, not illegal, not secret, but newly analyzed, showing significant branding investments linked to Montecito during the same period. Procedural changes were being discussed at palace level. Again, nothing illegal. Nothing confirmed improper. But timing? Timing is narrative fuel. Commentators began stitching together timelines. When succession discussions were happening quietly, brand expansions were happening loudly. Coincidence? You could almost hear keyboards catching fire. An unnamed palace aide, who may or may not exist, reportedly told a columnist, "The prince believes institutions survive by tightening rules, not bending them." That quote spread like wildfire. Was it real? Was it strategic? Was it planted? Nobody knew. But everyone shared it. And Meghan's critics sharpened their tone. She wanted modernization. She got magnification. She wanted autonomy. She got scrutiny.
See, when William was born and Harry was born and George and Charlotte and Louis, we got great pictures outside the hospital. I remember, and William and Catherine especially, they made such an effort to show the whole world their new baby.
Late-night satire shows jumped in too. One host joked, "In Britain, we don't do reality TV. Reality TV does us." But underneath the humor was something serious. A slow shift in public mood. Surveys conducted by a national polling outlet showed 38% of respondents believed succession transparency reforms were necessary. That's not a majority, but it's not insignificant. And here's where it gets explosive. A retired member of parliament gave an interview, carefully worded, diplomatically vague, where he stated, "Any ambiguity in hereditary succession, however minor, must be addressed before it becomes politicized." Before it becomes politicized. That's not a casual sentence. That's a warning. Because once succession enters political debate, it stops being royal and starts being national. And nations don't like instability, especially symbolic instability. Montecito responded with what can only be described as curated calm. Meghan appeared at a children's literacy event. Smiling. Polished. Effortlessly composed. If she was rattled, she didn't show it. But optics analysts noted something subtle. No direct references to the controversy. No clarifying statements. No definitive denials. Just silence. Strategic silence. The kind that works beautifully in celebrity culture. But in constitutional culture, silence breeds speculation. And speculation is oxygen to online investigators. Then came the financial speculation. Commentators began asking whether any potential legal reinterpretation of the Succession to the Crown Act could trigger ripple effects in estate allocations, ceremonial titles, even funding structures. Again, theoretical, hypothetical. But in the United Kingdom, theory travels faster than fact. Markets don't like theoretical instability either. A minor dip in ceremonial heritage-linked investments made headlines for 48 hours. Not a crash, not a crisis, but enough to remind everyone that monarchy isn't just tradition. It's economics.
And then when the baby was born, when Archie was born, that was another, in my view, a disaster, because I knew we was not going to get a picture of it. Everybody was hoping we would get pictures.
And economics hate uncertainty. Meanwhile, Prince William reportedly accelerated internal reviews of succession documentation procedures. Nothing public, nothing accusatory, but insiders described the atmosphere as tightened. And that word again, tightened. Rules being tightened, processes being reviewed, language being examined. If nothing is wrong, why review anything? That's the question critics keep whispering. But here's the twist. What if the review isn't about Meghan at all? What if it's about future-proofing? What if the prince simply wants zero grey areas when his reign begins? Because ambiguity is manageable when you're second in line. It's catastrophic when you're first. Still, the internet doesn't wait for nuance. It wants villains. It wants heroes. And increasingly, the narrative has crystallized into two camps: Team Modernization, Team Tradition, and somewhere in between stands Meghan Markle. Not charged, not accused, but undeniably central. Because whether fair or unfair, when you enter a 1,000-year-old institution and change the choreography, people notice. And when a £157 million inheritance case suddenly echoes phrases buried in royal decrees, people connect dots, rightly or wrongly. And that connection? That's what has Britain holding its breath. Because if Parliament decides to publicly address clarity reforms, this conversation stops being digital and starts being official. And once it's official, it cannot be unspoken. Stay with me, because if you think public debate is intense, wait until politics steps into the ballroom. By the third week of what commentators were now calling the bloodline debate, something shifted. The conversation was no longer just online. It was institutional. British Parliament confirmed, in a dry, 3-sentence press note, that a closed-session review on hereditary statutory interpretation under the Succession to the Crown Act had been scheduled. That was it. No names mentioned. No accusations. No drama in the wording. But if you've followed monarchies long enough, you know this. When governments use calm language, it's because the implications are loud. Montecito went quiet. Not lifestyle post quiet. Not curated orchard photo quiet. Strategic quiet. Scheduled appearances were postponed. A keynote speech on modern leadership in ancient institutions was abruptly removed from an upcoming summit's website. A charity gala listing Prince Harry as honorary guest suddenly revised its program. Coincidence? Maybe. But Britain's media ecosystem doesn't believe in coincidences during constitutional review season. Meanwhile, Prince William was photographed leaving Buckingham Palace with a folder so thick it might as well have been labeled Future Stability. No statement. No smile. Just that signature composed stare, the kind that says, "I'm thinking 10 moves ahead." And here's where the tension spikes. Legal commentators began outlining potential scenarios. Not predictions. Not confirmations. Scenarios. Scenario 1. Parliament issues a clarification statement reaffirming existing succession language, closing the debate neatly. Meghan and Harry move on. The monarchy resets. Scenario 2. Lawmakers propose minor procedural amendments to modernize verification protocols going forward. No retroactive implications. Just future-proofing. Safe. Manageable. Strategic. But then there was Scenario 3. The one nobody wanted to headline. A formal parliamentary inquiry into how succession protocols were administratively interpreted in recent years. Not an accusation of wrongdoing, but a review of process. And process reviews in monarchies are never small. Because even if nothing improper occurred, the mere act of reviewing signals doubt. And doubt is reputational dynamite. Financial analysts began speculating, purely hypothetically, about how prolonged uncertainty might affect ceremonial tourism revenue, heritage trust investments, and international confidence in Britain's institutional continuity. Again, nothing catastrophic. But monarchy runs on perception. And perception was wobbling. Then came the opinion column that ignited everything. A respected constitutional historian wrote, "Institutions do not fracture when rules are broken. They fracture when rules are perceived to be flexible." That line hit like lightning. Because whether fair or not, Meghan had become synonymous with flexibility. Modernization, rebranding, narrative control. And now critics framed the debate as something larger than her. They framed it as legacy versus latitude. Supporters rallied hard. They argued the monarchy had to evolve or risk irrelevance. They reminded the public that privacy is not subversion. They asked why women in power are scrutinized differently. Valid points. Powerful points. But the counter-argument wasn't about gender. It was about governance. And governance doesn't care about vibes. It cares about clarity. Inside political circles, murmurs intensified that certain members of parliament favored proactive transparency reforms, not because of Meghan specifically, but because the Marquis of Bath's case had exposed how archaic wording can collide with modern realities. In other words, the £157 million inheritance battle wasn't just aristocratic drama. It was a legal mirror. And nobody likes what legal mirrors reflect. Rumors began swirling that Prince Harry had privately expressed frustration over what he reportedly called institutional rigidity. Again, unconfirmed, but believable enough to trend. If true, that would place him philosophically opposite Prince William, who is widely perceived as the embodiment of structured continuity. Two brothers. Two visions. One monarchy. Sound familiar? British tabloids didn't hesitate. Headlines screamed, "Future King tightens rules as spare defends flexibility." Tradition versus transformation. The royal rift deepens. And in Montecito, silence continued. No fiery rebuttals. No televised defenses. Just measured distance. Which, in political storytelling, reads as either discipline or pressure. Then came the market tremor. A ceremonial endowment fund, largely symbolic but closely watched, experienced a noticeable withdrawal spike after international commentators began questioning Britain's succession certainty. Not a collapse, but enough to make financiers whisper. Because investors don't pull money over gossip. They pull money over risk. And when succession, the literal backbone of monarchy, becomes debated territory, risk meters flicker. Behind palace doors, insiders describe Prince William as unmoved publicly, hyper-focused privately. He has reportedly commissioned a comprehensive archival review of every succession-adjacent procedural update over the past decade. Not to target anyone, but to bulletproof the future. And that may be the most important distinction of all. Because what if this entire storm isn't about exposing Meghan? What if it's about eliminating grey zones before a new reign begins? If that's the case, then history may view this moment not as scandal, but as structural recalibration. Still, optics matter. And right now, the optics show a modern duchess at the center of an ancient legal echo. They show a prince reinforcing frameworks. They show parliament preparing statements. And they show a nation divided between nostalgia and navigation.
All of these lies started coming out, but we didn't know that she had told the royal family so many porcupines. So it makes sense. Oh my God, I've got to keep everybody away because if they start talking, the lies come out.
Classic.
The Marquis of Bath's case is still ongoing. Henry's eligibility remains under judicial interpretation. But what began as an aristocratic trust question has evolved into a philosophical referendum on monarchy itself. Should ancient decrees bend? Or should modern families conform? And here's the uncomfortable truth. No matter how this ends, something has shifted. If Parliament reaffirms everything as valid and intact, critics will claim overreaction exposed fragility. If reforms are introduced, skeptics will argue the debate was justified. If inquiries expand, headlines will explode. There is no scenario where the conversation simply evaporates. Because Britain has now tasted the question. And once a monarchy tastes a question about bloodline clarity, it never fully forgets it. Meghan may never be formally challenged. Prince Harry may never face institutional censure. But the era of unquestioned protocol flexibility? That chapter appears to be closing. And Prince William? He stands positioned not as aggressor, but as stabilizer. Whether you see that as necessary discipline or calculated consolidation depends on which side of the debate you occupy. But make no mistake. The £157 million inheritance battle was the spark. The Act of Settlement 1701 was the fuel. And the succession to the Crown Act? That's the stage. Britain isn't collapsing. It isn't revolting. It isn't imploding. But it is recalibrating. And recalibration in monarchies feels dramatic because monarchy is designed to feel eternal. Yet even eternal systems adjust. The question now isn't whether Meghan is panicking. It's whether the institution itself decided that ambiguity is a luxury it can no longer afford. Because when crowns rest on clarity, even whispers sound loud. And in Britain right now, the whispers are echoing. And now the question isn't just about Meghan Markle. It isn't just about Prince Harry. It isn't even just about Prince William. The real question is this: when ancient crowns meet modern ambition, who bends first? Because let's be honest, if this was just a random inheritance case involving the Marquis of Bath, it would have stayed buried in legal journals. But it didn't. It exploded. It trended. It forced the United Kingdom to say words like clarification and review out loud. And monarchies are not built to enjoy reviews. So tell me, is this responsible future-proofing by a cautious future king? Or is this the beginning of a deeper royal fracture nobody wants to admit exists? Was Meghan simply modernizing tradition? Or did modernization collide with machinery that was never meant to move? Drop your thoughts below. Because Parliament hasn't spoken publicly yet. Prince William hasn't made a statement. Montecito remains polished and silent. And silence in Britain? That's never empty. It's strategic. If you think this story ends here, it doesn't. The next development could redefine how the Succession to the Crown Act is interpreted for generations. So if you want updates before the headlines spin them for you, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because when the next royal document drops, we'll be here reading between every single line. And trust me, in Britain, the fine print is where the real drama lives.